First of all, let's start this video with some much needed context. So back in September 2018, Netflix announced a live-action retelling of the original Avatar: The Last Airbender series. Now the words Last Airbender and live action have to this day never, well, really mixed together, to say the least. In my previous Avatar video, which you should totally check out if you haven't seen it yet, I explained how the show is not only set to stand the test of time, but also how it managed to become timeless. And this is not the first time a live-action adaptation has been produced attempting to capitalize on this, because the M. Night Shyamalan film is today regarded as one of the worst movie adaptations ever made. So naturally the fans were mostly skeptical at best with the announcement. Then the show was originally intended to release in 2020 at the earliest, and well, obviously that never happened. And not to mention that the film and TV industries last year were put in a standstill for obvious reasons, which only further delayed the show's production. And if that wasn't bad enough, last August we received the news that Michael DiMartino and Bryan Konietzko, the original show's creators who had been hired as executive producers and showrunners from the beginning, had just published a letter announcing their departure from the project. Now we don't know what really happened. The full details of these kinds of things tend to come out a few years later. Much like when we found out why Edward Norton and Terrence Howard didn't make it past their first entry in the MCU, for example. The letters did provide a few discouraging details. DiMartino gave a very earnest and polite explanation, pointing out how productions are always very challenging and they never go exactly as originally planned. Sharing how Stoic philosophy taught him to realize what is in our control and what's not, and even mentioned how he tried to adapt, like an air nomad would. So once he accepted that he could not control the creative direction of the series, he left. What's even more worrying was how he added how Netflix's adaptation might turn out to be good and something that we all enjoy, but whatever version we do get will not be the one that he and Bryan envisioned. And unfortunately, Konietzko was even more explicit, stating that Netflix made a promise to support their vision and that there was no follow-up to that promise, saying that the project was handled in a, quote, negative and unsupportive environment. That this was not simply him and Mike not getting their way. Had new ideas been in line with what they considered the spirit of Avatar, they'd have openly welcomed them, as well as reassuring that there are still many talented people left working in the series, some of which they hired themselves, and just like in DiMartino's letter, that perhaps what's left of the creative team can produce something both old and new fans will enjoy. But in case you haven't read the full letters and are interested in doing so, I left a link in the description below. So the news could have barely been any worse. The fact that they both implicitly claimed that they were not given the creative freedom that they were promised can mean many things, and the backlash from fans was of course quite significant. Countless people on all kinds of social media claim that they won't even bother watching the series when it comes out, along with the fact that last February Paramount and Nickelodeon, along with Mike and Bryan, announced the Avatar Studios. Think of this as an animated Marvel Studios that will have both Konietzko and DiMartino as creative officers for all the new animated Avatar content. That will kick off with a feature film that's supposed to start production soon. So that's that, right? Who cares if Netflix's live action sucks? Fans got what they wanted anyway. The Avatar universe will continue to be expanded, new stories will be told, and the two original creators will be the ones calling the shots.
Why should we care?
Well, first of all, the Avatar Studios was quite literally what I was hoping would happen right after I found out that Mike and Bryan were leaving the live action series. And here's what I mean by that. Last summer, the Avatar universe's relevance, many years after Aang's and even Korra's stories had both been told, was cemented, after both shows were some of the most watched in the US. So, I thought that Mike and Bryan couldn't just stand by and let Netflix decide the fate of that fanbase and all the hype that their universe had been getting over the last few years. And what do I mean by this? Well, if a franchise stops producing successful films and shows, they always end up fading away sooner or later. Look no further than the Pirates of the Caribbean, for example. Back in the 2010s, this trilogy consisted of some of the most expensive film productions that brought some of the biggest box office numbers that had ever been seen until then. But after the 4th and 5th entries in the series, as well as the controversial decision to make a 6th movie without Johnny Depp, how many people are left that are still excited about this franchise? at least compared to when the first 3 movies were in the works. That's why late last year, I kept telling myself, if only Mike and Bryan could realize this. If only they announced that they're gonna start working on a new animated series or something with them in charge, then the Avatar franchise would have a plan B in case the Netflix plan goes wrong. And not only did they do exactly what I could only hope for, they even went the extra mile, because the Avatar studios will start with a film, sure, but it won't stop there, meaning that the Avatar franchise now has its longevity essentially confirmed. However, despite all of these good news, my point still stands. The Avatar Netflix series is still way more important than you think, because the fact remains that there are still millions of people around the world who don't watch animated shows. And you might be thinking, well, those people won't even be interested in the show. It's mostly the fans who are gonna watch it. But that's where you'd be wrong. We have to look at the bigger picture here. I mean, think of how many people were first introduced to the character of Ahsoka Tano with the 2nd season of The Mandalorian just a few months ago. Think of how many people that never saw the original Transformers show saw at least one of the movies. Hell, think of how many even learned that Transformers was a thing because of the movies. Oh yeah, and that franchise made almost $5 billion, by the way. I mean, does anyone really think that if those 6 movies were all animated, they'd have come even close to making that much money? Because I can bet my life that more people will watch Netflix's live-action series than the movie being produced by Avatar Studios. And despite all that, there are still plenty of fans that without Mike and Bryan running the show, won't even bother giving it a chance. And honestly, I'm not sure that I can really blame them. But what does worry me is that whenever this new live-action adaptation steps one foot out of line or makes one creative decision fans don't like, it will get bombarded with criticism.
This is pathetic! My jokes are way funnier than this!
I think he's got you pegged.
And look, I know that recent examples don't help my case. The new Star Wars sequels were indeed a pile of without George Lucas. And one of the countless reasons on why that was the case is that they misunderstood George Lucas's vision. And after reading Mike and Bryan's letters, well, it looks like we could be headed in a similar direction, but that doesn't mean that we will. George Lucas also made mistakes along the way. You know, his vision wasn't always perfect. Aang's story, for example, it was told almost flawlessly, but that wasn't really the case for Legend of Korra, as much as I love that show as well. I know the Star Wars sequels are mostly nothing but an insult to Star Wars itself, but I'm pretty sure that George Lucas was barely involved in the making of The Mandalorian, for example, and had basically no influence whatsoever in Rogue One. It was also during this new Disney era that the last season of The Clone Wars came to fruition, so it can be done. Konietzko wrote in his letter that there are still plenty of gifted minds working in the project. I know that this looks nothing like Zuko, but come on. Tell me that a brilliant actor like Dev Patel doesn't have the talent to portray Zuko's story. Do I hope that whoever they cast looks more like Zuko? Of course I do. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they will cast someone who looks like him. But I hope that whoever is cast is not only talented, but is actually given a great script to work with. I'm not expecting it to be as good as the original show, but it doesn't have to be. That's almost impossible. That's why a lot of the fans don't like The Legend of Korra. The main reason being that it's not as good as the original show. And I understand that fans will once again be skeptical at best for the most part. Yet I remain hopeful that they'll at least manage to capture what made the original so great, respecting the source material as much as they can, with a few necessary but also competent changes along the way. Because I know how important this show will be for the Avatar universe, whether I like it or not. And let's not forget that Netflix have now more competition than ever before. Disney Plus will only continue to produce more and more shows with all the properties they own. And Netflix know that Avatar is one of the very few properties they hold the rights of that will be able to compete with Disney. They know that they cannot afford to mess this one up. But I'm not gonna lie that I'm not as optimistic as I'd like to be. But I haven't given up hope on this show. Because if it is a success, if it does manage to capture the spirit and the magic of Avatar, then believe me when I tell you that this franchise will probably grow into one of the biggest in the world. becoming way more famous than it is already. And I want that to happen. And I'm certain that even the most skeptical of fans want that to happen too. Thank you very much for watching that video. If you liked what I had to say, leave a like itself and subscribe for more. And tell me in the comments if you agree or disagree with my take on Netflix's Avatar. I would very much like to hear what you have to say. Now that I have talked about Avatar The Last Airbender in 2 separate videos, I'm gonna start working on some Legend of Korra ones as well, because I have a lot to say about that, as you can imagine. Don't hesitate to check out the link I left in the description and the comments to my Avatar playlist, which I'm sure you'll all enjoy, especially if you've seen both shows.
There's no hope now. It's over.
No, it's not over.
You cannot win.
I also left a link to my Twitter as well in the description. Follow me there for updates, the occasional meme, and even video suggestions. I'm also going to be doing a few more Monsterverse videos because there's a lot to discuss there as well after Godzilla vs. Kong's success, including a couple of compilations and at least one video essay. Nevertheless, I hope to see all of you around here very often. This is me, signing off.